and campaigns. We seek to link issues, organise around campaigns, and build unity against all forms of racism, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism. We've got an excellent panel of speakers today from across the world. So I'm not going to keep you any further because we've got a really, really packed agenda, and I want everybody to be able to hear from our wonderful speakers today. So our first speaker we have with us is Jacqueline Luqman. Jacqueline is a producer for the Real News Network, producing content that examines the historical connections to issues facing Black, poor, working class, and oppressed communities today, and providing radical solutions to them. Jacqueline, you have the floor.
So thanks so much for having me on this panel. This is really exciting for me because being in Washington, D.C., the belly of the imperialist beast around the world, this perspective from this particular place, I think, is very important. And it's important to me and exciting to me personally to be a part of this international conversation about the struggle that we are in a new phase of around the world, because our fight is really not against Donald Trump. I know people like to frame it that way, but our fight is truly against a global system of settler colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism that uses white supremacist ideology and racism as tools, as well as Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, as tools to convince mostly working class, poor and other white people, and very often working class and some middle class people of color, that their enemies are not the capitalist class or the military class or the imperialists or the neo-colonialists. These people are made to believe that their enemies are, poor Blacks, the Latinos, the Muslims, the immigrants, the gays, feminists, these others, and working class and poor white people believe this because the people they want to aspire to be, the capitalists, the imperialists, the militarists, who have a global agenda of domination, tell them to. And the thing is, it wouldn't work if poor and working class white people, and yes, absolutely some so-called middle class, or what we like to call petit bourgeois, people of color who aspire to benefit more from this capitalist system. It wouldn't work if people didn't fall for it. So this is not a Trump problem. This is a global hegemony that is largely driven by the imperialism of the United States and its allies in this country and around the world. This has been going on for centuries. So this is bigger than Trump. And it's also bigger than the current Black Lives Matter global movement, because it's truly an extension of the Black liberation movement from generations ago that has never, ever died. It just has new members in the streets now. So it's bigger than this battle against Trump. It's about the full system of US imperialistic hegemony that's been exposed by the honestly uniquely repugnant and despicable person of Donald Trump, but as well as the ravages of the coronavirus, where we see, especially in this country, the coronavirus has exposed the hypocrisy and the insufficiency and truly the hatred of humanity that capitalism poses to the world. But the current uprising in the US and around the world is important. And that's why the media isn't covering the ongoing protests as much as they were when they started back in May. So, the Black Lives Matter protests that started with the public execution of George Floyd are still going on. So far, there have been probably more than 10,000 protests attended by millions of people. So the media is focusing in the United States, and I'm sure as they have done around the world, on this so-called violence in the protest. And they're talking about property damage. When the media says, oh, protesters clashed with police, they're framing it as if the protesters are violent. But what it really is right-wing violence against protesters and police repressive violence against protesters, much of what we're seeing in Nigeria, and what people are protesting there that's still going on in the streets. And that is boiling over into the upcoming elections, where there are armed right-wing white nationalists, white supremacists, so-called militia members, confronting protesters who are protesting against racism and against racist police terrorism, who are now being characterized as terrorists because the government and its agents and the media mischaracterizes Black Lives Matter and Antifa as if Antifa is a thing. It is an ideology, and it just means anti-fascist. You know that, I know that. But these right-wing actors do not know that. These right-wing people don't know that. They believe the media narrative and the narrative coming from the right-wing government that these people are destroying the country and burning down cities, when actually all of the violence against human beings that has been committed at these protests has been committed by either right-wing people against protesters, or being committed by the police against protesters. So now you've got legislators who are criminalizing protests. And we're seeing that not just across the country, but also around the world. And this is bleeding into, I did not mean that pun, but this is also being reflected in now the threat of armed people saying that they're going to show up as poll watchers at protests, at early voting sites in the United States. So we're fighting an entire system of white supremacist fueled, US-led imperialistic, capitalistic domination that is showing up on the streets in the United States still, and we're seeing it reflected also in the struggles against the same issues around the world. So that's what it's like here in the belly of the beast in Washington, DC, to fight against racism and the larger system of white supremacy and imperialism.
Brilliant, Jacqueline. Thank you so much. And it's great to have you all the way from Washington. And from Washington, we go all the way to California with the power of Zoom. And it brings me great pleasure to welcome our next speaker, Michael Brown, who is a leading activist in the Black Lives Matter movement in LA. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I really appreciate the international audience. Oops, my bad. All right, we're back on. But yeah, first things first, I just want to say greetings to the whole panel, also the folks at Standing Up to Racism, and greetings to our international audience who are watching this. You know, I love coming to these forums and talking to folks because it's always good to get other perspectives, you know, not only from here domestically, but just internationally as well. You know, I think it's real pivotal that we try to really, you know, rebuild this Black radical tradition of having internationalist politics and realizing that we have friends overseas. But just in my brief time that I'm gonna talk here, I'm gonna go scatterbrain a little bit. I definitely echo the sentiments of Sister Jacqueline when she says that, you know, this fight is way bigger than the fight against Trump. And I think a lot of people on the ground here realize that, but, you know, there's a lot of obstacles that we're facing currently as well in terms of, you know, not only the upcoming election, but, you know, what are we gonna do afterwards? So yeah, as people know, you know, that time-honored tradition has come again every 4 years where our rulers, you know, they pick the choices and then they present them to us and we have to pick one of them. So we're basically facing, you know, the sort of the neo-fascism, the quasi-neo-fascism of Trump versus, you know, the sure-to-be neoliberalism of Joe Biden, you know, neither of which presents a way forward for working class people in this country, particularly Black folks. The threat as far as, you know, continuing attacks against the working standards of working class people in this country, austerity, continued police terror with impunity, and also, as Jacqueline mentioned, you know, this growing presence of right-wing, you know, vigilantism and you know, basically serving as an auxiliary force to the police here in this country like they've always done. That's something that's going to be a growing threat no matter who wins this election. And I think a lot of people right now are trying to grapple with that. There's interesting debates happening on the left here in the ground in America. the little bit of a left that we do have, in terms of, are we voting for Biden for quote unquote harm reduction or lesser evilism, or, should we just gear up all the way to just confront Trump, in the event that he wins? So those are interesting conversations that are happening right now. People are throwing a lot of different ideas around out there in terms of how do we confront this, not only in the moment, but just also long term. But I think in terms of organization on the ground right now, we're not necessarily at the strongest point that we've been, particularly, when you saw all of the insurrectionary activity in May. A lot of the movement here in the streets has retreated into, getting out the vote and electoral politics and those mass actions that we were seeing, they're still happening in places here and there, cities around the country. So that's true that the protests are ongoing, but the character of the protests and the militancy of the protests have tailed off. That's just the truth. And there's a variety of reasons of why that's happened. Number one, the continuity of the organization is just not there. It's lacking. It's not where it needs to be. And like I said a couple of minutes ago, there's sections of the movement and sections of people who are participating within the movement who have basically collapsed their efforts in the get out the vote campaigns and politics more so aligned with, the nonprofit section and sort of these organizations and appendages of the Democratic Party that, historically and even currently, their goal is to suck the social energy out of the streets and channel it back into the safe confines of electoral politics. So I just wanted to give people more so an update on some of the issues that we're facing here. I think after the election, it'll be interesting to see what kind of a labor movement we can build in this country. You see some rumblings amongst, certain sections of the AFL-CIO who are, introducing at least the idea of a general strike in the event that Trump doesn't want to leave office. So that'll be interesting. And also the Black Lives Matter movement. All of the people who are going to vote for Biden and Harris, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out next year, because Biden and Harris, according to their histories, they will, like Trump, they will attack the social movements in the streets as well when it comes to the National Guard and looking the other way from rampant police violence. So I just want to, give people, not a bleak outlook of what's happening here, but to let you know some of the challenges that we are facing and that we do have some hills that we have to climb. So I'll stop it there, and I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the panel. And thanks again, Julie.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that very excellent contribution. Just wanted to do a couple of shout outs that we're getting from our YouTube and Facebook page. So Claire sends solidarity from Southside Unison and Stunts Racism. Nancy sends us support and solidarity from Washington, D.C. as well. John said it's great to hear sharp, excellent analysis from Jacqueline. Got solidarity from Everton and EU. Elder sends us solidarity from Brazil, and Layla sends solidarity from a USCAW union. Okay, so our next speaker that we have is Raymond Bennett, who is co-convener of Stand Up to Racism, who I don't think needs any more further introduction. Raymond.
Thank you very much. And I want to start off by offering solidarity to the comrades, brothers and sisters fighting in the United States against what they've exactly identified as a racist state and a racist president. The most racist president, I think, that has been in terms of his open support for white supremacy, in terms of he's not prepared to criticize. He's even indulged in QAnon fantasies. But the UK is not innocent. Capitalism comes dripping from head to toe from every pore with blood and dirt, and the transatlantic slavery had its roots in this country. We have to understand that when they built the slave system that exists inside America, it was built with the British. 87% of British exports from 1784 to 86 was built off the back of the transatlantic slavery. They are the architects of it. And part of the reason why we have to support the struggle that takes place inside the United States is because when you look at what's going on now with COVID, you have to be very, very clear about it. The millions of people that have died is as a consequence of our governments prepared to stand aside and allow us to perish because they're not willing to put the resources in. Actually, let's be clear about it. In the period that they've said there's been COVID, the billionaires in the world have made $7.8 trillion through their tax scams, their inherited wealth. So they've benefited directly from what's happening. So we won't listen to this stuff, particularly when black people are dying and different communities are dying disproportionately. The sister is absolutely right to say they use racism, as Frederick Douglass said, to divide each to conquer both. I love Gil Scott-Heron when he said that the revolution, he said, wasn't going to be televised. It's going to be streamed and shared, because what's happening with the Black Lives Matter movement is the biggest revolt that's taken place, that's led by black generals to question the very foundations of the inequality that exists. That's why we have to join. We're part of an international movement. I'm very proud to be on the same platform as the Greeks and the Austrians who defeated Golden Dawn. Yeah. I'm very proud to say that we're part of a movement that defeated the British National Party. The same white supremacists that are supported in the United States, their organizations have been smashed to bits inside Greece by mass movements, by general strikes, and by resistance. We have to build a black and white movement that challenges it. That's the reason why we're marching on the International Day of Resistance for UN elimination of racism. We have to understand it is an international movement, and we've got to be part of that. We have to understand the attacks on Muslims, on the different communities that they're trying to attack us with. We have to have solidarity with them. We have to understand the racism from our own government. When the Prime Minister describes women who wear the veil as looking like terrorists or bank robbers, after all of us now are wearing masks. There's nothing un-British about it. The French president has said he's worried about the question of Muslims inside France. Racism is being used to divide, attack people. And we have to do that. The other thing that's taking place is an attack on refugees. Trump was caging children inside Mexico. And I tell you what it means when you dehumanize people. We have to remember what happened last time when you dehumanize people. It's called the Holocaust. It's because the way that anti-Semitism was used to divide and conquer people. We have a long tradition of resistance. That's what we're part of. We're part of that Black Power movement. We're part of that movement that talks about resistance and change. And that's the reason why I think what we have to understand is that we face the crisis of COVID, the economic destruction, the millions of people being tossed into unemployment. We face the question of draconian governments falsely saying they're going to change things, but really using the powers to strengthen what the police do to people. And I think the solidarity that was shown to George Floyd, the tens of thousands of people that march, we have to harness that to lead to real change. We are committed to decolonizing our society. There is nothing respectable about those people that defend the slave masters. And I know that the founding fathers would one day say we're all created equally while having slaves. It's that hypocrisy is embedded in the DNA of the way we run our society. And we have to rip it up, because for future generations, we have to make sure that this doesn't happen. And we have to do this by organizing. And our movement, they constantly say to us that Trump says you can destroy the Black Power, the Black liberation movement. And what I want to say is this. I think he should take his own advice. When he had coronavirus, why didn't he fill himself up with bleach? Why didn't he try some of his theories on the world, or irradiate himself, as he said? This man's incompetent. He's a racist incompetent. He's a guy that doesn't pay his taxes. He's a white supremacist, and we have to mobilize against it. But the alternative isn't just listening to leaders. It's that mass movement that takes place inside Portland. It's the demonstrations that are taking place here where we've taken the knee. We have to challenge the status quo. We have to stand together in solidarity, because if we don't, the future means that those people, the militias, the far-right people, come forward with their answers. The Salvinis inside Italy, the racist populists who've used their basis for the crisis last time to try and blame each other. So my words to everybody else is, let's celebrate UN Anti-Racism Day. Let's make sure that the people who are responsible for the disproportionate deaths are held responsible. That's why we want public inquiry in this country. And that's why we'll join any demonstration in the United States or anywhere else in the world to give solidarity. And I want to give solidarity to the people marching in France and Greece today against for justice for refugees. So if Britain isn't innocent, solidarity with those people fighting, and we want to hold the police to account. I think the money that they get should be spent on actually really helping people. And, that's the call that's come out of the United States. solidarity, brothers and sisters, solidarity with the rest of the people. And I think that my final word is this. We have defeated the British National Party in here by black and white unity, which was a fascist organisation. We destroyed the National Front from my childhood onwards by that form of unity. And we have to do that. It's worked in Greece, it's worked in Austria. Let's use those same forces to push back the forces of white supremacy and what people like Trump stand for. Black and white unite and fight. Let's make sure that we fight for a better generation for those people that are looking for the future and justice for all those people that face injustice. So let's make sure that that happens. Stand up against racism, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And thank you very much for all the people on there and solidarity to all the sisters that are fighting back. And I'll stop there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Weyman. Always such powerful words. And I just want to say, a large scale, over this afternoon, we had over 700 people joining our workshops, which is fantastic. And now we've got close to 600 people joining us on our live stream. And we want to keep that going. So please do keep sharing. This is such powerful words. And this is such a great example of what the anti-racist movement is doing now. We've got loads of solidarity. We've got solidarity from Poland, Denmark, Greece. Dave and Martin send solidarity from Unite and the Union. We've got Charmant who sends solidarity for Vietnam. So it's a real scale of real world class anti-racism that's going on, which is absolutely fantastic. And it brings me on to invite our next speaker, who thankfully has been part of a real leading movement. Last week or so, we got to celebrate the fantastic news regarding the trial outcome for the Golden Dawn, and Thanasis Kampagiannis from Greece is one of the leading lawyers, and he has been an anti-fascist that has been leading this movement against Golden Dawn, and had the victory in the trial, which was absolutely incredible. So I want to bring it to him.
First of all, thanks a lot. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation, because the fight against racism and fascism is an international struggle, and this is why it means a lot to me to address this conference. We have had a tremendous victory in Greece with the conviction of the neo-Nazis of Golden Dawn. On the 7th of October, tens of thousands of people were outside the court mansion in central Athens and cheered when the announcement was made that the court declared Golden Dawn a criminal organization. To put you in a context, Golden Dawn was a tiny, openly Nazi organization that started with a magazine back in the beginning of the 1980s. They were infamous for their violent attacks and their admiration for Hitler and the Holocaust. They made it to have a political breakthrough in the national elections of May-June 2012 during economic crisis and austerity. They elected 18 MPs and polled as a third party in Greek national politics for quite some time. The penal prosecution against them was the result of the anti-fascist uprising that followed the murder of anti-fascist rapper Pavlos Fissas in September 2013 by a Golden Dawn battalion squad. Only under this popular pressure did the government and the state decide to act and start the penal prosecution. The phrase that Golden Dawn is not a political party, but a Nazi criminal gang has been there in the leaflets and the literature of anti-fascist and anti-racist organizations since the beginning of the 90s. But the state turned a blind eye to this criminal activity. Lots of murders, murderous attacks, heavy bodily injuries against migrants, refugees, people of the left, or the anarchist movement, anti-fascists, or anyone that the organization labeled as subhuman had taken place before September 2013. The penal trial against Golden Dawn tried 3 such cases and examined witnesses for dozens more. These 3 cases give you a glimpse of the neo-Nazi criminality. First case was the murderous attack against the Egyptian fishermen in June 2012 in their house, where a squad of Golden Dawn invaded and smashed the head of Abu Zide Barak while sleeping. The second case was the murderous attack against the communist trade unionists in September 2013 for the purpose of terrorizing the union in order for them to sign the worsening of conditions for their members. And the third case was the murder of Pavlos Fissas by an organized group of Golden Dawn members who mobilized just before midnight, met at the local offices of Golden Dawn in Nikia, headed to the place where Pavlos was and stabbed him. What was very important for the process was the examination of all these cases under the clause of the criminal organization. So the fascist attacks were not separate acts of hotheads of the organization, but centrally organized and orchestrated by the leaders of the so-called political party. The organization had a paramilitary wing of battalion squads following the model of the Nazi party in the early 30s. So the leaders of Golden Dawn were standing in the dock for directing a criminal organization. The ideology of the organization, National Socialism, provided the motive for all these crimes. Now, it was not easy to score this victory. The state felt obliged to start the prosecution, but it was far from pursuing it. The state prosecutor proposed the acquittal of all the defendants for the criminal organization. She presented all these attacks that I referred to as separate, unconnected crimes. This is why the role of the anti-fascist movement was absolutely central in this fight. The victims and their families needed lawyers against the other side that had a defense paid by the state budget, as their lawyers were all appointed staff for the MPs of Golden Dawn. They needed the support of people outside the court, as Golden Dawn tried to terrorize witnesses, even by beating them from coming to the court and testifying. They needed the support of investigative journalists and alternative media, as the mainstream media snubbed the trial for many years and never reported for its proceedings. For us, for the lawyers who worked pro bono during this trial representing the victims, it was a very tough battle. We needed to work for our clients and dedicated months and years to have a thorough examination of the files, something that the police hadn't done. With our intervention, the court made it to see all the important evidence that it would have otherwise lost sight of. And at the same time, we participated in hundreds of meetings all over Greece, organized by Kerfa and other collectives to raise public awareness around the trial. The victory against Golden Dawn is a historic achievement that wouldn't have been possible without the anti-fascist movement. Of course, we're still waiting for the final decision on whether Golden Dawn leaders and cadre will be driven to prison next week, and we demand that their sentences are not suspended. And of course, we know that the fight against racist policies of the governments and the European Union is still ahead of us. It is state racism that feeds and provides space for fascist organizations to grow. But we are glad to say that we have proven that the rise of the far right can be stopped. What the Greek example shows is that the radicalization of the far right, even if it tries to portray itself under the disguise of the parliamentary political party, can result in a mechanism of violence that we haven't seen since the interwar era. And that in order to stop that process, you need a vibrant anti-fascist movement that will intervene in all levels, in the street, in the workplace, or even in the courts, to stop and smash the fascists' effort. So I want to thank you again for the invitation and send my messages of solidarity from Athens.
Thank you very much for that really excellent contribution, Vanessa. We've got more solidarity message coming in. So Dennis said, brilliant international platform. Let's build the global movement against racism. Black Lives Matter, refugees are welcome. Lots of solidarity and people who have inspired by the movement against Golden Dawn. So thank you very much. Please keep sharing the links. Those of you watching on Facebook and YouTube, share the links to your friends and family to join us. Okay, so our next speaker has sent their message in a form of a video. So it's Christine Buchholz. Christine is an MP for Asterhen gegen Rassismus in Germany. So we're going to have Christine's video now.
Dear friends, on the conference of Stand Up to Racism, I bring you the greetings and solidarity of the movements against racism and fascism in Germany. I'm sorry I can't be here, but I will bring you some messages from our movements and the situation here in this country. Today is the 9th of October. This is the first anniversary of the attack on a synagogue in the city of Halle. A fascist tried to attack the synagogue and to kill the people inside who were praying on Yom Kippur. He did manage to do so and then went on killing a woman passing by and killing a young man in a kebab store. This murder and this attack shook our society as well as the racist murder of Hanau, where a fascist killed 9 people of migrant origin. So this is one part of the picture of the situation in Germany, where we have a polarization between the far right that is getting, on one hand side, more militant, but also is still there in the parliaments with the AfD party, which is still there in police and army, where many cases came on the public now of racist and fascist in this so-called security forces. On the other hand side, we have the movements against racism and fascism that are still very lively and active on the streets, and also shocked by these racist and fascist attacks, mobilizing many people, for example, in the Black Lives Matter movement in May. There's another movement popped up after the lockdown, and this is very important to focus on this for a while. This movement is called Querdenken, which means something like lateral thinking, and they try to give the impression that they are not left, not right, that they're in a way neutral, but just against the government and against those on the top. But in truth, they are deeply connected with the right wing and also the militant Nazi scene. All fascist and far right groups try to use this demonstration to build their structures. The AfD tries to support this to get new followers, and the initiators of this movement that brought up to 30, 40, 50,000 people on the streets twice in August in Berlin. So they don't even try to separate from the far right. We demand don't demonstrate with Nazis, distance yourself from the far right, but they don't do so. And so I think it's very important that we managed to organize counter demonstrations that didn't have been big because of the corona situation, and also because of the militancy of some Nazis demonstrating with this new movement. But we managed to get at least the first time a couple of hundred, and the second time 1,500 people on the streets, which is not enough, but as I said, it is difficult at the moment to bring people in big masses on the street because of the corona situation. And so we are working on broad alliances that are able to reject these demonstrations and this conspiracy myth that are spread by these demonstrations. So there's another movement I want to mention because it's important to see that this movement is still there, and this is the movement in support and solidarity with the refugees. So people were very shocked by the fire in the Moria camp and what happened afterwards. And there have been the pictures on the televisions in Germany about the situation on the streets of Moria, the bad situation in the new camp, and 170 cities declared that they want to take refugees from the Greek islands. So their slogan was, we have space, wir haben Platz, so bring the refugees to our cities. And it was the right-wing interior minister Seehofer that didn't allow to do so, and so we collaborated with the right-wing Greek government that has an interest in keeping the refugees on the Greek islands and not letting them to the mainland. So this movement was very spontaneous. It was very young. It was very strong. So and it's important to see that this mood and this movement is still there. Next year we are facing a year of many elections, local elections, regional elections, and also on a national scale. And we as Aufstehen gegen Rassismus, so we will campaign against the AfD and trying to kick them out of the parliament. So they grew over the last years until 2018. And then so we saw the effect of massive demonstrations against fascism and against racism in different cities, and also a very big central demonstration, 250,000 in Berlin. And from this time on, the decrease of the polls of the AfD began. So at the moment, they are still too big, but I think it's important to see that we can beat them. So this is what we are doing next year. I think it's important that we get connected with you internationally, that we support your fights, like the fights of the Greek movements against the Golden Dawn and in support of the refugees, but also the fights, many small fights that are taking place in all the countries. Our strength is our international coordination and our international spirit, because the alternative to nationalism and racism is solidarity and internationalism. And we wish you a good conference that gives you a lot of power for the coming fights. And I hope that we will join together next year, next March again, at the Day Against Racism, the UN Anti-Racism Day, with a common action against racism in many countries. So all the best to you. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Christine, who couldn't be here, but she sent a video which is really, really useful. We've got so many comments coming through from what Christine is saying. We've got Martin Walker, who says, sadly, racism is a problem across everywhere. Happily, those anti-fascists everywhere in Greece show that the battle can be won. Dennis says, thank you, Christine, for showing that we must stand up against anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and anti-migrant racism from the far right. Injury to one is an injury for all. And we've got lots of solidarity from Margaret, Erica, and others who send their solidarity to German activists, which is absolutely brilliant. We've got well over 600 people watching on our live streams and over 200 people watching on our YouTubes. We've got a real big reach of about 1,000. So please do keep sharing and liking this video, sending it to your networks. We've got still a fantastic lineup of speakers for you joining, not to mention Jeremy Corbyn, who will be on this call very, very, very soon. So do please keep tuned. I'm really delighted to bring in our next speaker, Dawn Butler, who has been an MP, a Member of Parliament for Brent Central since 2015. She's also served as the Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equalities in Jeremy Corbyn's Shadow Cabinet from 2017 to 2020. So without further ado, Dawn, please do take it away.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth, and it's wonderful to be a part of this international movement today. And I just want to say to everybody, hold your nerve. When you're in a battle, when you're in a fight, and when they're losing and people are wounded, they will become even more nasty. And what we have to do is hold our nerve. Stand Up to Racism is a vital and important movement. How vital is it? It saved the life of my friend Rosie Cooper, MP, who was half an hour away from being murdered. And one of the group decided that they didn't want to go through with it and they wanted to stop it, and they called Stand Up to Racism. And that is why it's important that we have a movement and that we embolden the movement, because without us working together, without good people uniting, then we're not going to defeat the bad people. and that is what we have to do. We also have to be mindful that we're not sleepwalking into some fascist state. And I say that quite nervously, being a legislator that's currently sitting in Parliament with a government that is trying to dismantle our democracy, trying to take away the very fabric of what we do as legislators. A government that doesn't want any oversight, doesn't want any scrutiny, and most definitely cannot handle any criticism. We've got a few legislations, bills that have been coming through, like the Overseas Ops Bill that talks about criminal activity abroad and not being able to seek justice just because there have been some vexatious claims. We've got the Coronavirus Act that's basically saying that the government can do whatever they like, when they like, whether it's imposing fines, whether it's taking away somebody's liberty and not being held to account, or whether it is part of the science. And we've got the Spy Cops Bill, the Covert Human Intelligence Services Criminal Conduct Bill, but also known as the Spy Cops Bill, which I also voted against. All of these things are really important in our fight against racism and our fight against injustice and our fight for justice. And the thing that gives me hope is that we are not in this battle alone, that there are so many people from all different corners of the world fighting for justice, and we're all fighting together. And that gives me hope. It makes me optimistic. It makes me think that actually we are winning. And even though I know the choice isn't great in America, to see the end of Trump will be a victory for all of us and a step in the right direction. And so I just want to say that to end on the words of John Lewis, when he said, never ever be afraid to make some noise. Never be afraid to get into trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble, if we want to see the society that we want to see. So I think all of us working together internationally, around the globe, that it's nice to stand in solidarity, but more powerful than that, we are winning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawn, for that very, very excellent contribution. Our next speaker is Martvs Chagas. Martvs is currently the Brazilian Workers' Party MPT's National Secretary for Combating Racism and was previously the National Secretary of Affirmative Action and Human Rights Superintendent for the state of Rio. Martvs?
Martvs. Hello. Good afternoon. I would like to thank everyone and the organizers of this event, and to say that here in Brazil are going through a very difficult time in our struggle against racism and all the atrocities that are committed by our government. You must be following this. We have a government that is extremely racist, homophobic, sexist, a government that doesn't respect anyone, doesn't respect differences. It is very difficult to fight when you had the mainstream media and when you have neoliberalism and when have the spaces of power which are blocked against different voices. But this doesn't stop us. We are creating, together with other organizations of social movements and Black movements, a way of reacting to the type of aggression that we go through every day. And in a certain way, we're also following closely a decision of our Brazilian Supreme Court, which established that for this year, Black candidates will receive public funds and will be destined for the first time in Brazilian history. We will be competing during the elections where Black candidates will be in a better position to compete so that we are able to reach the spaces and the places of power. In Brazil, most of our population is Black. We are the second largest population outside Africa. And despite this, we are not in positions of power. We're not in the councils, in the local councils. We're not in the state assemblies. We're not in the Congress. And it's difficult to see this. And at the same time, we are hopeful that this new legislation that is fruit of the struggle of the Black social movements in Brazil, which is the fruit of a congresswoman, Benedita da Silva, who was the first Black councillor in the state of Rio de Janeiro, and who is now a candidate to become mayor of Rio. So I believe that we will have the ability to make a difference and to create enough forces to fight against racism and against this government. And we hope that in 2022, they are no longer in power. What we say here in Brazil is out Bolsonaro. And together with out Bolsonaro, we want to see Trump out as well, so that our countries can have freedom, so that they can have governors who are committed to the racial issue and with humanity. This is what I say at the moment, and is what I would like to contribute with. And to say that in the Workers' Party, we are investigating, we will be monitoring the funding for the Black candidates that will be disputing these elections this year. I ask from you positive energy and that you can help us so that we are able to win, and that this victory will be for the Black people, not just in Brazil, but everywhere in the world. I thank you for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martvs, for joining us, and those of people are sending their solidarity and well wishes with you. Solidarity from Julie, who says, solidarity for you guys in Brazil and your battle with the right-wing government there, and Pauline Bruter, who says that watching your struggle in Brazil is courageous. So lots of well wishes there. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Michael Wong. Michael Wong is the Vice President of Veterans for Peace and part of the San Francisco chapter of 69, and one of the group's co-founders of the group Pivot to Peace. So we are very lucky to have you joining us from the US, Michael.
Thank you. From its very beginning, the US has always had two opposite aspects. One is the side of freedom and equality. The other
Os
side
Estados Unidos sempre teve dois lados. Um deles é a liberdade, o outro é o materialismo, a exploração e o genocídio de americanos, de negros, de muçulmanos, asiáticos, dentre outros. A opressão sempre veio de cima contra as classes.
divide and conquer. It's basic to imperialism and it's basic to racism. After the Civil War, for example, there was the Jim Crow movement that basically reinstated another form of slavery. Following that, there was the war on drugs, which heavily targeted people of color, particularly Black and brown people. There was the Chinese Exclusion Act from 1882 to 1943. Based on yellow peril stereotyping, the act prevented more Chinese from immigrating to the United States, and Chinese were driven out of small work towns in the Western US by violence, including massacres. During World War II, Japanese Americans were put in internment camps. During the Cold War, there was the Red Scare and the Yellow Peril against China. And today, both are combined with human rights violations and color revolutions, blaming China for COVID and leading to Chinese and Asian bashing at home. But there were also those throughout American history who fought against slavery, who fought against Jim Crow, who fought against exploitation, who fought for women's rights and for equal rights for all people. In the 60s, the civil rights movement, people of all races, including thousands of whites, joined together to tip the balance of power in favor of equal rights. Imperialism abroad is directly linked to racism at home. Recently, Stop AAPI Hate has so far received over 2,500 incidents of Asian bashing, including violent physical attacks that people have reported. Today, the Black Lives Matter movement marches against racism at home, the peace movement marches against imperialism abroad, and Asians march in both movements. Again, thousands of whites as well as people of all races have joined together to tip the balance of power. Asian activist leaders from multiple communities, including both Asian and Black, have historically worked together. In the 60s, Chinatown radicals in San Francisco worked with the Black Panthers. More recently, Reverend Amos Brown, a leader in the San Francisco Black community, supported the Comfort Women Justice Coalition in building a memorial to the 400,000 mostly Asian women who were forced into sex slavery in World War II by Imperial Japan. Against divide and conquer, the solution is solidarity. Either we all stand together or we all hang separately. Solidarity is the path to a better world for all people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was a really great contribution and a really, really important point that we need solidarity across the world if we are to defeat racism. So our next speaker is Aima. Aima is one of the co-founders of All Black Lives Matter, which is a movement that sort of erupted during this time that the world is in a bit of a crisis. They've been demonstrating across cities in the UK for weeks, well, actually for months now. So Aima can tell us more about that. Aima? Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's amazing to be amongst so many speakers. So yeah, my name is Aima. I am part of All Black Lives UK. We have been protesting since June, and we have had demonstrations in London, Bristol, Manchester, Oxford, all around the UK basically. What really sparked us to start ABL UK was George Floyd's death. As all of us know, it was such a heartbreaking thing. I still haven't watched the full video, but after that, I started discussing with one of my co-founders, Tasha, and started saying, this happens in the UK as well. The UK is not innocent. And we have to realize that a lot of the reasons why America is the way it is today is because of the UK and the colonization and trying to take over America that they did. So we started off all these protests. And throughout that time, I've been learning a lot more about Black Lives Matter and everything that's going on in this world. And one thing that boiled everything down to is fascism, the increase of fascism in the Western world and the increase of fascist leaders that is growing and growing, and they lead fascist organizations. We are currently living in a place where the National Guard has been sent to protesters to harass them, attack them when they're peaceful. And people think that's perfectly normal, even though people have their rights and they're allowed to protest for what they believe in. I feel like I do not want to blame Trump or Boris for everything that happens, because this has been a pattern that's been happening for so long. But it seems that when both of them came into power, everything started becoming a lot more overt and not covert, and a lot more racism, Islamophobia, homophobia, fascism has been spreading around those both countries. I feel like since I'm 19, my generation has really been pushing forward and really been opening the conversation and dialogue and being honest with themselves about, is this the life that we want to live? Is this the type of countries we want to live in? We need to stand up to this. We need to fight back. And one thing that really makes me upset is that whenever we protest, there are still people who come out, fight us all the time. I have been physically and verbally attacked protesting these past few months, and it is such a common thing. But when we speak about it, we aren't heard because we are angry, we're aggressive, our lives don't matter to some people. And even though we've been protesting for 3 to 4 months, the news has died down completely. And so a lot of people think that it was a moment, not a movement, but Black Lives Matter is a movement, and it will always be a movement. One thing that I think is very, very important for us to realize is that we need to educate people and educate ourselves on the reasons why racism is still so prominent in this society, and why we are separated based by race and not class. And we aren't joining together with the white lower class people. They view us as the enemy, but we aren't their enemies. Their enemies are the people in power, the capitalists, Boris Johnson, Trump, all the leaders of the Western world. And I don't know how we're gonna fight the divide, but it takes time and education. And it hurts me to see that our leaders do not care about our lives. They really don't care about our lives. I remember I had an interview with CNN, and I called out Boris Johnson live, and I said, this country's racist, you need to solve it. And the only thing he responded was giving a comment to BBC saying the UK is not racist, but I stand in solidarity with the US. And it just proves that this country does not care about Black people's lives. They really don't care about our lives. They project all their energy onto the US and forget that the UK is not innocent and that we're still fighting for our lives. In our Bristol team, we took down the slave masters statue, and it's been very hard because I don't blame people for not understanding, because they haven't been educated about people like Winston Churchill and everything. But one big thing is that it feels like people say we are destroying their history, but we are teaching them about their history, and we're showing them that your country is not innocent. They've been hiding things from you. We care about you. We want to uplift you, and they're bringing you down. So again, I'd like to say thank you so much for having me. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Aima. I remember being on many of your protests back in the summer. The work you do is so fantastic, and it's great to see young Black women taking the lead in these movements. I'm not the only one who agrees that. Paula says All Black Lives UK are doing great work, and Pauline says actually joining together will help us tip the balance of power. So really great words there. I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, Baba AA, who is from Nigeria. He's a Black Lives Matter activist over there, and he's also a trade unionist in Nigeria. So over to you, Baba.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you to Stand Up to Racism for the invitation. And I salute our brothers and sisters in the United States of North America for the fire this time. The Black Lives Matter movement is of utmost significance at this point in time, not just because it was the largest mass movement in recent times in the United States, but the fire engulfed the world, and spread to not less than 60 countries. There are three aspects of this that I would like to speak to. First, in each of these countries, people called out the governments to also account for systemic racism, for attacks of the police on Blacks, on Aborigines. For example, in Canada, at the same time, in solidarity with the BLM, people were demanding justice for the killing of Regis Kosinski. You had in Australia, people were calling for justice for the killing of David Dongre, that was also killed by the police shouting, "I can't breathe," in 2015. You had in Germany, people came and said, look, the German state itself, look, your hands are not clean. In France, people came out to call for justice against the killing of terror and so on and so on. And in Africa, like in Nigeria, we came out in solidarity with BLM, but as well to demand justice for victims of, police brutality. These include our comrades Alex Obu of the Socialist Workers and Youth League, who was killed by the police in January, as well as several people killed during the confinement, including 16-year-old Tina Ezekwe. And right now, and this also leads me to the second point I want to point out, apart from the international spread. And the international spread is important because capitalism is an international system. It will be defeated globally with our mobilization, with our fight back, with international socialist revolution. So it is important that you had this international and linking the way and manner that racism is taking place in these different countries. I mean, Malcolm X said it all. You cannot have capitalism without racism. And that also is why you will see in each of these places, the state was being called out with regards to killings, with regards to the state's police, because you cannot have capitalism without its coercive arm. Racism has different forms, and because the police is the police, the prisons, these are used to keep the oppressed down. In your colonies like Africa, you have right from the period of colonialism and so on and so forth, you had inter-ethnic divisions. They were sports in, Lord Lugard said it, what they call the divide and rule system. These are some of what still continue, perpetuated by the local ruling class to try to rally around support based on primordial ethnic sentiment and so on and so forth. And the police is used against the class as a whole. And this second point is of utmost importance for us right now in Nigeria, where the NSAS movement has thrown up a challenge. We are fighting for the very, right now 15 people have been killed by the police after, we now have 2 weeks of the uprising of the youth against police brutality. Towards summing up the last bit, and which I'll use the last few seconds to say, is the place of history, the pulling down of Edward Colston's statue, the renaming of streets in Uganda and other. You cannot separate the current moment itself flows from an history of capitalist exploitation, of oppression, and in reclaiming our history, in fighting to overthrow this degenerate system, we are looking forward to a future in which our shackles are broken and a new system, a socialist order, becomes the norm across the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that powerful contribution. Up next, want to do some shout outs from our social media. So Michelle says solidarity from United Steelworkers in Toronto. Solidarity from London Unison Firefighters. We have solidarity from Staffordshire Association for Black Lives Equality. Linda from Madrid said that she's with us. We've got lots of James from Chesterfield says solidarity. Paula says all Black Lives UK are doing great work. Roger says that the best educator is the struggle. Fight back together. Okay, excellent. So Facebook Live now has over 10,000 reach and it's still rising. So please keep commenting, send the links to your mom, your sister, your brother, everybody, send it to the family group chat. We want everybody to get online and be part of this. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Mahamadou Kamara. Mahamadou is campaigning for justice for his brother Gay Kamara, who was murdered by the French police. Mahamadou, you have the floor.
Good evening. I wanted to thank all the people who organized the Stand Up to Racism conference. My name is Camara Mahamadou. I'm going to talk about the murder of my brother in January 2019 by the police in suburbs of France. The police shot my brother 8 times in his car when he was in his car. After killing Guy, the police called the emergency services, and my little cousin was next to him. And the police didn't even warn my family. They called the emergency services who left with my brother, and they put him in a hospital in the center of Paris. And they registered him under X, not under his real name. And the police, 4 of them, shot 8 bullets in the car of my friends, and they put him in a hospital under the name of X, but they knew his name and they had all his papers, his identity papers on him. And the prefect of Paris called our town in the suburbs and called our Muslim association. And I learned from the cultural association that my brother had been killed. We went to the police station in Paris and we told them that if you don't tell us what really happened, we're going to go into Paris and we're going to burn anything down. We learned that the whole French system is absolutely corrupt. From the judges, the police, they completely lied to us. They told us that he wanted to drive away from the police in a stolen car and force a roadblock, but none of that was true because I did my own investigation. Yeah, so we really learned that they were lying, and we did our own investigation to learn what absolutely happened. You have to know that the death penalty was abolished in France, but sadly, that rule doesn't really apply in practice to Black people because my brother was executed. So today we're fighting for justice in France. So people are scandalized when Black people get killed in France, but in the United States, but we should not forget that in Europe and in French, Black people get killed by the police, and the whole justice system keeps covering up these brutal murders. We're talking about murders here. These are not just abuses by the police. Right now in France, at least every month, there's 1 or 2 young people of color who get killed by the police. The fight has to be won together on an international level. Black people today in Europe can be killed by the police without even having caused a crime. My brother was not a criminal. He didn't even put the police lives in danger. And because he tried to drive away peacefully, they shot him and they execute him. And it's a racist system that makes the police racist, that makes the police kill. And it's the police that protects them when they kill an innocent Black man. when the police commits a murder, he must be judged like any other citizen. The police should not be above the law. That's all I had to say. Thank you for inviting me to tell the truth about my brother Kamara's gay story. And it's really important that we exchange the kind of stories between us and build international solidarity. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Mahamadou, and thank you from the bottom of our hearts. I think everybody who listened to your really harrowing story has been touched by not only your story and the saddening murder of your brother, but also your courage and your strength. We have loads of sympathies and solidarity from Coral, from Pauline, from Jan, who says we are all Guy, from Luke from Australia, from Julie, from Marge, from lots and lots of others. That's absolutely touching, and unfortunately this is becoming too much of a common reality for our youth, but your words are touching and inspiring very, very much so. Brings me on to invite our next speaker, Nahila Ashraf, who is one of the organisers for Stand Up to Racism in the Northwest and has been involved in various campaigns over there in the anti-racist struggle. So I'll bring it over to you, Nahila.
Hi, thanks very much for that. And can I just start by giving my solidarity message to all those, not just our previous speaker, but all those that are fighting for justice after losing a loved one or a family member at the hands of the police or the state. And I say that on behalf of everyone from Stand Up to Racism. And, you know, it's amazing to think that you have the courage to continue with that battle. And it is a battle. And we have people in this country, such as Janet Alder, who has spent decades fighting for justice from the state, having lost a family member. So we stand in solidarity with you and hope, you're successful in your fight. And I want to say also that it's so wonderful to be on a panel with people from across, not just here in Britain or in Europe, but across the world, because actually it's so important that as an anti-racist movement here in Britain, we recognise that our movement needs to link up internationally, because actually that's what the racists are doing. The far right are linked up internationally, and therefore we need to do the same, because it's so important that we learn from each other, that we stand in solidarity from each other, we celebrate each other's victories, because that is a thing that allows us all to continue with our local battles as well. So I just want to say that as well. It is very, very important that we are here today connected up internationally. And we here in Manchester, I mean, I'm from Manchester, but here in the Northwest, we've had our own battles with the far right. I mean, we've heard speakers from Greece talk about what it's like to fight Golden Dawn. And actually, it was the lessons that we learnt from the battle against the Golden Dawn that meant that when we here in Britain and here in the Northwest had Tommy Robinson, who's a far right, he's actually a Nazi, standing in the European elections, we were very clear that we needed to stand and fight and make sure that no matter what, he didn't get elected. We were very clear on that because we could see that what could happen if he was elected. We can see what was happening across the world and in Greece, and understood that actually when Nazis, when racists, when far right activists take those political positions, they use those positions to smash the working class and attack minorities. So we were very clear that we wanted to make sure he didn't get elected. And I want to say that actually the Northwest, for people that don't know, the Northwest of England is quite a huge area. And in big cities, we were very confident that we had the Stand Up to Racism groups, we had the networks to make sure that, he wasn't going to be able to come and, have public rallies in Manchester or Liverpool. But actually, we were also very concerned that there are parts of the Northwest where we didn't have a huge network of people. But actually, what we found, and I'm really proud to say this, that wherever he went across the Northwest, people took to the streets and called him out for what he was, called him a Nazi. And they did that because they saw what other Stand Up to Racism groups did, particularly in places like Manchester and Liverpool, where we had the network. And actually, it's also really important to understand why he was targeting the Northwest. The Nazis and the far right, they target areas where they think it's an easy area for them to win. And in the Northwest, I hate to say this, but it was because of poverty. The areas where he was going to do public rallies were some of the most deprived areas in the country. And actually those two things go together. Poverty breeds despair, which allows the far right to take a holding. So actually we pushed him back, and we did that because we learned from the wider movement. So I want to thank the wider movement for giving us an opportunity to learn those lessons and take to the streets. I also want to say this as well. Tommy Robinson was pushed back by activists on the ground, black and white activists, Labour Party members, non-Labour Party members, trade union activists. They all got together and they made sure that he didn't get elected. Even now, his message was clearly against Muslims. So we were the key target for his racism, but actually the working class, the movement got together and recognized that actually, you know, an attack on one is an attack on all of us. And I think that's something that I'm so proud of, that it was black and white, young and old, that stood together against Tommy Robinson, and we pushed him back and actually made sure that he is now history where he belongs, in the gutter. I also want to say this as well. Right now, I am optimistic. I am hopeful, because actually the Black Lives Movement across here in Britain, across Europe and across the world has really inspired people. You know, it's a movement that is made up of young and old, black and white, coming together and recognizing that actually it isn't just about George Floyd, although that was horrific in its own right, and we want to see justice for his family and friends, but actually it's about systematic racism across the world. And here in Britain, the reason Tommy Robinson was able to even get the foothold that he did have for that time was because actually of politicians like Boris Johnson, who use a language of the racist, who give confidence to the far racists to, you know, organize and build. It was because of people like Boris Johnson, who goes around making the comments that he makes. It was because and is because of our present Home Secretary, who attacks refugees and blames refugees for what's happening in the world. And let's be very clear, COVID has disproportionately impacted Black communities, and it will continue to disproportionately impact Black communities. And this government would like us to blame the victims rather than actually say that it's their fault. It's Black people who are on the forefront of you know, working in the NHS, stacking our shelves, or, you know, being care workers, being support workers in hospital. That's why they are on the front line and disproportionately being impacted. And only now in Manchester in particular, they are blaming young people who are university students who have been forced to come to Manchester while doing lessons online, who are now being blamed for the spike in COVID. We know that this government will blame anybody than themselves. They want us to blame each other rather than holding them to account. For us, we need to build a mass movement. Even with COVID, even with the pandemic, we have to make sure that we are organized, and where possible, we take to the streets while being socially distanced, while wearing our masks, and actually hold this government to account so that we don't allow them to build and give confidence to the far right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nahella, for that excellent contribution and showing us how it's done in the Northwest and how you have fought and won. Our next speaker, so a couple more shouts out from social media. So Julie says this conference is really showing how much we can connect internationally, and this has been the most inspirational thing for me today. Thank you very much, Julie, for that wonderful message. Our next speaker we have now is David Rosenberg. David's from the Jewish Socialist Group, a campaigning organization which fights for freedom and equality. They are active on issues that affect the Jewish community, other minority communities and oppressed groups, and the wider labor movement. David?
Anti-fascist greetings. 2 questions. Who are the enemies of Donald Trump and the white supremacist American ruling class? And who does Donald Trump believe them to be? The answers to both questions are not necessarily the same. When Trump returned to the campaign trail last Monday, we heard the answers straight from the horse's mouth. No disrespect to horses. He picked out 2 elements. First, he said, Biden made a corrupt bargain in exchange for the party's nomination. He's handed control to the socialists, the Marxists, the left-wing extremists. God help us if they ever got it. We would never have the same country back again. And then the other element. Trump said, Joe Biden is also owned by the radical globalists, the wealthy donors, the big money special interests who shipped away your jobs, shut down your factories, opened your borders, and ravaged our cities while sacrificing American blood and treasure in ridiculous, endless wars. As he spoke, his hands made the white power symbol. You don't have to be an expert on white supremacy and their so-called great replacement theory to hear the anti-Semitic dog whistles and know who he's talking about. He tells his supporters, we are the ones standing in their way. We are the ones standing up for American workers, the American family. He does not mention Black Lives Matter in these quotes, a movement whose powerful demands for justice and equality absolutely challenge the entrenched institutional power and privilege of the white, middle, and upper classes. But when he does, he portrays Black Lives Matter as the street manifestation of the international conspiracy he imagines he is up against. Remember how he described Black Lives Matter protesters immediately after George Floyd's murder by police. He called them looters, thugs, radical left, lowlife, and scum, and he name-checked Antifa. Make no mistake, Trump and his backers are frightened of Black Lives Matter precisely because it is so large, so multiracial, so multi-generational. When they demand justice, they reflect the immeasurable depths of historical injustice Black people endured through slavery, and simultaneously speak to the issues of all the oppressed, exploited, and marginalized in America, who want to overturn existing economic and political power structures and build a country that is run for all citizens equally. Boris Johnson showed the same fears when he issued guidance to schools here not to use resources of so-called extreme organizations who want to challenge capitalism. He has Black Lives Matter and Extinction Rebellion in his sights. How is it extreme to analyze the economic system that underpins slavery and empire and traps billions today in global poverty? Trump and Johnson join the dots in a certain way. We have to join the dots conceptually and practically between Black Lives Matter, the anti-fascist movement, and movements for social justice globally that challenge Trump, Orban, Modi, Netanyahu, and Johnson. We have to defeat the conspiracy theories that exist on both sides of the Atlantic. In Britain, Tory complacency and failures over the COVID crisis have provided fertile ground for an alliance of COVID deniers, anti-vaxxers, Trump supporters, organised fascists, and dangerous conspiracy theorists like David Icke. Icke has long pushed wild anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. As a Jewish socialist here, I'm proud of the activism of Jews of colour in America and of the solidarity with Black Lives Matter and call to action by 600 American Jewish organisations in an advert in the New York Times a few weeks ago. I'm even prouder of my friends in Jews for Racial and Economic Justice and Boston Jewish Workers' Circle, who have engaged in solidarity work for several decades. But I'm ashamed of groups in Britain, like the Board of Deputies, who one week make the right noises in support of Black Lives Matter, and the next week provide a platform for the racist and Islamophobic Home Secretary Priti Patel. Some of them feigned surprise when she abused that platform to showcase her anti-traveller racism. I wasn't surprised. As the Warsaw Ghetto fighter Marek Edelman put it, to be a Jew should mean always being with the oppressed, never with the oppressors. Solidarity.
Thank you so much, David. That was really, really inspiring. And thank you to all those who are watching. We've reached well over 10K, but we want to keep doing more. So please do keep sharing, keep commenting, keep liking, keep sending it all to your friends and family. And please do continue to engage with us with our comments. They've been really great to hear. Coral says that to remind us that the first doctors to die fighting with COVID-19 were Muslim. Martin says if it wasn't for Black people working in the NHS, it would collapse. And Iris says Trump and Johnson, racist virus super spreaders. Couldn't agree more. And we've still got a fantastic lineup of speakers to still keep us going, not to mention Jeremy Corbyn, who will be joining us very, very shortly on this call. But I'd like to again introduce another fantastic speaker that we are very lucky to have all the way from Greece. Petros Constantinou. Petros is from the KEERF and the KEERFA, which is part of the Greek anti-fascist and anti-racist campaigns that also helped in the fascinating and glorious victory of Golden Dawn trial. So Petros, over to you.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me in this fantastic meeting here, an international meeting, activists from everywhere, but also I want to send my solidarity to Camara from France and to stand with all the victims of police brutality everywhere. France today, and Paris especially, was the center of one of the most important international demonstrations. The sans-papiers, the migrants without papers, they were in the center of Paris, sending a message that the trade unions in France, the anti-racist and the anti-fascist activists are standing there, standing against Macron and also Marine Le Pen. And I will start first to remind people that before some years, when Donald Trump won the presidency of the United States, he was really, I mean, Donald Trump is not a fascist, but he really worked to empower and to give courage and to abandon every fascist and far-right organization internationally. First, he had Steve Bannon with in his team, and he worked very hard in Europe to support every fascist and far-right organization. So before 4 years, the narrative was that the far right is on the advance. Forget it, you cannot win them. They are going to be the winners in this period of crisis. They're going to repeat what happened in the 30s. So after 4 years, we have to discuss this narrative again. We see that Donald Trump has been defeated by a mass movement going on and on in the United States of America, the women, the migrants, and the Black Lives Matter movement, and workers' resistance in the United States. So if you go to Europe, you will see the same picture. What happened just last week in Austria when FPO has been defeated in Vienna, and what happened in Greece. And I want to put the success of the anti-fascist movement on this context. The defeat of Golden Dawn is the defeat of all this narrative internationally. It is a defeat for racism. It is a defeat from for the Trumps and his friends, his neoliberal governments who are going around and are playing the card of racism, of Islamophobia, of anti-Semitism internationally. So we are very happy that we have this victory. This is not a Greek victory. This is a victory of the international anti-fascist movement, because without the support of the international anti-fascist movement, this victory wouldn't be possible. So for us, it's very important because now there is mass resistance. There is the Black Lives Matter movement. There is the movement that Christine Buchholz spoke before in Germany and in Europe, the movement that stood up after the fire in the Moria camp. So this movement is really a very powerful force, especially in the period that of escalating economic crisis, and the ruling classes and the governments are using the pandemic in order to stop the workers' resistance, to split the movements by playing the card of racism. What was important in the fight against Golden Dawn, and for us, it's very important that we are now watching that the leaders of the neo-Nazi group, a group that used the parliamentary road and the stamping on the street of migrants, of trade unionists, and all those who had different views for life, for sexuality, and for religion, and so on. We see that this defeat is an important defeat for all of us who are fighting against populism and far right around Europe, because populism and far right, they are really the greenhouse for the fascists and neo-Nazis. They can use their electoral victories in order to get on the streets and attack the workers' movement and our democratic and civil liberties. How we won this fight? 3 things were very important. First, it was the unity, the united front, what Leon Trotsky spoke in the 30s, and what the Anti-Nazi League and the Stand Up to Racism for me is standing. It's very important to unite all the different currents, socialists, the trade unionists, the migrants, the women, in one fist against the Nazis on the street, demonstrating, giving to them no platform, but also fighting against racism. The second thing that was very important is workers' resistance and workers' action. The general strikes in Greece against fascism played a crucial role. First of all, to impose that the neoliberal government in 2013, that they will move to a crackdown against the neo-Nazis. Second, when the trial started, we had thousands outside the court, and we isolated the Nazis when they tried to be present there. And last, on 7th of October, by bringing hundreds of thousands outside the court. It was really very important. The other thing that was very important is that we brought the neo-Nazis on the trial. And that was a great step for the anti-fascist movement by having the civil action there. Thanasis, Kampagiannis spoke before of that, and have the possibility of bringing in unity. For us, it was very important to fight against the fascists, and because I know the discussion in the United States of America and the Antifa movement, we oppose them on the street by the masses, by the workers' resistance. We didn't choose the road of just organizing some small groups to attack the fascists. We are the majority. We have the power of the trade unions, and we can isolate them and make them feel the power of millions of the workers who are black and white, who are women and men and transsexual, who are Muslim and Jew and Christian and non-believers. This is the real force that can isolate and smash the Nazis. For us, this is a great lesson of how we isolated the Nazis, who were trying to build battalion gangs in the neighborhoods, and they were attacking and they were stabbing on the streets. The trade unions were there. All of us were there united, and we stopped this violence. There's also another big lesson for us. We don't stop there. You know, the neo-Nazis, they had the support of the state, of the deep state, of the police, of the judiciary, and so on. They are still there. The prosecutor in the trial of Golden Dawn proposed the acquittal of the neo-Nazis. And for us now, it's very important not just to stay there and celebrate the victory, but to keep on the fight, because the fascist threat is still there in Greece and internationally. We split the neo-Nazis, we can isolate the most militant force, but the populists are there and they are still in danger. So we have to build continuously against them. And the second thing, very important, is that we have to build against racism. What's happening in Moria and the Greek islands is what Pete Patel is arguing in Britain. Bring the refugees and send the refugees in remote islands. The remote islands are Lesbos, are Samos, are Chios, are the islands who are the European Union. It is a shame for these governments who supported the agreement with the Erdogan government to isolate the refugees in this island, to keep thousands of people without clean water, without nothing. And now they are just in tents under the open heaven and just near the sea. People will die there. So we have to oppose the racism that it is drowning thousands of refugees in the borders of Fortress Europe. We have to stand very clearly for open borders, free movement of the refugees, paper for the migrants, as they are shouting now in Paris, asylum for all. We have to smash this racism of
absolutely agree,
Fortress Europe. So let's go and unite for the 21st of March next year. Let's build the international solidarity. We can beat them.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Petros, for that really excellent contribution. Michael Brown from the panel said, many lessons, solidarity from Long Beach, California. On Facebook, we're saying, thank you, Petros, for drawing out the importance of the fight back by women, the Black Lives Matter movement, and by workers. The racists and fascists can be beaten. Cora says, make it a hostile environment for Golden Dawn. And someone said, solidarity, Yanis says solidarity, United Against Racism and Fascism from New York City. So I'm going to go with our next speaker. And just to let you all know, a couple more speakers and Jeremy Corbyn will be on very soon. Our next speaker, also very excellent, Danny Haiphong. Danny is a contributing editor to Black Agenda Report. He's also a co-coordinator of the BAP Supporter Network and an organizer for the No Cold War campaign. Danny?
Thank you so much for having me, and I want to extend my solidarity to all of those who have participated in the panel, as well as all of those who are watching. The instability of Trump's presidency and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement have upset the US power structure. White supremacist groups such as the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo movement have increased in number and visibility to protect the right of white America to the historic spoils of stolen land and stolen labor. These groups have found their great white hope in Donald Trump in his many appeals to keep them safe from Black Americans, immigrants, and oppressed nations all over the world. Equally troubling has been the massive counterinsurgency campaign to smother the movement against racism in its crib. The US crusade against Black Lives Matter is enabled by the very forces supposedly monitoring the white nationalist organizations and groups in the United States. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, for example, has been praised for protecting Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer from a white terrorist plot. Yet the FBI was a leading force in the repression of Black freedom fighters such as Marcus Garvey and Claudia Jones, as well as Black freedom organizations such as the Black Panther Party. Beginning in 2014, the FBI monitored activists in Ferguson and would later target them as quote-unquote Black identity extremists. Fertile ground was thus laid for a surge in white nationalism embodied by Donald Trump. The enablers of white nationalism are numerous within the halls of power. Police officers are top recruits of white nationalist organizations. The US military has stoked Trump's anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant racism by destabilizing the planet with endless war. Trump is a member of the same class of corporate thieves that called Black Americans quote-unquote mud people, as they were sold quote-unquote ghetto loans by banks like Wells Fargo in the lead up to the economic collapse of 2008. Trump's quote-unquote shithole country comment was made possible by the Western world's continued plunder of the African continent. Racism is a necessary precondition for keeping the United States at the top of a global capitalist order built on centuries of colonialism, genocide, and slavery. Activists from around the world express solidarity with Black Lives Matter for this very reason. The key word is global. Racism is a global ideology in a global system of oppression. A massive wave of anti-China sentiment has swept across the US and its allies in the Western world to expose both the global character of racism and the dire need for international solidarity. Anti-China and anti-Asian racism are nothing new here in the United States. The brutal US invasion of the Philippines more than a century ago, the US's internment of Japanese residents during World War II, and the genocidal wars in Korea and Vietnam all possessed racist justifications. Anti-China racism intensified in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic as the US and its allies moved quickly to blame their ills on China. Trump has repeatedly called COVID-19 the quote-unquote China virus to cover up for his role in the deaths of over 200,000 people. Sanctions have been leveled against Chinese officials and tech companies. Chinese college students have been targeted as potential communist insurgents and forced to transfer from school or return to China. The US's pivot to Asia has accelerated under Trump. His administration is now trying to rally Japan, India, and other countries in the region to join the military encirclement of China. And these are just some of the policies that have soured US-China relations and threatened the safety of Chinese and Asian American communities living right here in the United States. Anti-China and anti-Black racism are intimately connected. The same US political and economic elite waging a multifaceted assault on Black Lives Matter has blamed China for everything from the pandemic to the economic crisis. Black Lives Matter is the internal enemy, while China is considered the most dangerous foe to US hegemony. A similar dynamic occurred during the First Cold War. The US desperately wanted to hide its Jim Crow terrorism from international eyes, yet relied upon white supremacist organizations such as the John Birch Society to demonize the Black freedom movement as a Soviet plot. Racism is just as antithetical to human progress now as it was then. Police accountability is antagonistic to the interests of the wealthy, who see the police as their loyal protectors. China's enormous economy and global leadership on the problems of poverty, climate change, and COVID-19 threatens the interests of a society dependent upon military force to maintain hegemony status. Say their name has become an increasingly popular means of reifying and reinforcing the humanity of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the many Black Americans killed each year by the police. Let Black Lives Matter be the first step in building a global movement that says racism's name and fights it with solidarity. Racism lies at the root of the two biggest questions confronting humanity: whether to support Black Lives Matter and oppose US-led escalations toward China, which have deepened anti-China antipathy. The answer appears easy, but the path forward is difficult. Full solidarity must be given to Black Lives Matter. Anti-China racism must be rejected without hesitation. How we express and act on these principles should be the only thing up for debate. Thank you.
And thank you, Danny. Absolutely brilliant. Solidarity, fantastic words. And thank you for all those of you who are still continuing to watch us. Keep sharing. You've been fantastic and everyone's agreed that it's been such a fantastic meeting. Bridget says it's been an inspirational lineup. Maxie says no to oppression. And Alta says congratulations to Golden Dawn and well-spoken Petros. Thank you again. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker who's been patiently waiting. She needs no introduction, but I will introduce her as Sabby Dhalu, who is the co-convener of Stand Up to Racism. Sabby, over to you.
Thank you very much. A big thank you to all of our guests today. Solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement and everyone who has lost a loved one due to racism. I want to reinforce that the racism of Black Americans is rooted in slavery and hundreds of years of oppression. And this is a product of Britain's colonialism and imperialism. And the best impact of the Black Lives Matter movement here was that for the first time in history, Britain was forced to confront its disgraceful past of slavery and racism, which obviously racism today is a legacy of that. The Black population and what it suffers is almost identical in America and in Britain. So both in terms of the disproportionate deaths in police custody and police harassment and criminalization of Black communities. I should note, though, that no police officer in Britain has ever been charged with the killing of a Black person, and that the police harassment of Black communities has really worsened and intensified under the pro-Trump Johnson government in just over a year. Secondly, I want to stress that it's no accident that the Black Lives Matter movement emerged out of the COVID crisis. And the COVID crisis is an anti-racist issue because of the disproportionate impact on Black communities, both in terms of the disproportionate deaths of Black people, but also the disproportionate impact of the economic ramifications of the coronavirus. And also because governments are using racism to distract from their catastrophic COVID policy. So we have Trump attacking the Black Lives Matter movement, and we have Macron attacking Muslim communities. Obviously, our thoughts go out to the teacher that was killed in France yesterday. We also must condemn Macron for his whipping up of racism towards 6 million Muslim communities in France, and by accusing them of creating a counterculture. And also in Britain, Boris Johnson has been whipping up racism towards refugees in order to distract from his failing COVID policies. So we need a worldwide zero COVID strategy. This is an anti-racist issue. There are 40 million cases worldwide, 1.1 million deaths worldwide. And we need a strategy to eliminate the virus as they pursued in New Zealand, Austria, China, Vietnam, and other countries. And this is of utmost urgency. And finally, obviously, we have the US presidential election coming up. And I just want to remind everyone of the impact of Donald Trump's presidency. So obviously, we've seen a rise in racist, Islamophobic, and anti-Semitic attacks in the US, in Europe, and in Britain. We've also seen an emboldening of fascist and far-right organizations. So in Britain, the Tommy Robinson movement, the last big mobilization of fascists here, received funding from pro-Trump Republicans. But I think that this illustrates why we need unity against racism and fascism. We need to unite Black, Muslim, Jewish, Sikh, Hindu communities, socialists, liberals, trade unionists, LGBT communities, disabled communities, students, young people, and all anti-racist and anti-fascist against a movement against racism and fascism. And I want to finally give a plug for the UN Anti-Racism Day, National and Worldwide International Day of Action on the 20th of March, 2021. And also there'll be demonstrations outside the US Embassy after the on the day after the US presidential election. Thank you very much, in solidarity.
Thank you very much, Sabby, for that great contribution. Just a couple of comments. Sophie says spot on analysis from Danny. Dave says well said, Sabby. And just want to let people know that we have now currently had almost 15,000 in terms of Facebook reach, so people who have been engaging with us, and at one point over 1,500 engagement on YouTube as well. So I'm going to go to my final speaker, who needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce them anyway. It's Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy has been the Member of Parliament for Islington North since 1983, a sound anti-racist activist, anti-fascist activist, and was the leader of the Labour Party from 2015 to 2020. Jeremy, you have the floor.
Barbara, thank you very much, and congratulations to everyone that's organised this incredibly impressive international call when we can come together globally to fight against racism. And if one thing COVID has taught us is that it is possible to communicate with each other very easily across the world by this means. And so when the COVID crisis is over, let's make sure we carry on this form of communication. International meetings, international rallies, when we have big screens up at all our rallies so that we can have the voices from people all over the world at all of our events. Because it's that sense of unity that will defeat racism, that begins to understand those that are using racism and the horrible way in which much of our media seek to report this. I've been so impressed by so many of the speakers that I've heard on this call today. My great friend Dawn Butler, MP, my neighbour and friend David Rosenberg for his work in the Jewish socialist movement and in all anti-racist struggles all of his life. And of course, our great friends from Greece and other countries. And I want to say congratulations to the anti-fascists in Greece for their huge achievement in defeating Golden Dawn. The first time I came across Golden Dawn was when I was in Greece for one of the elections quite a while ago. And I was in the center of Athens. It was a beautiful, beautiful warm evening. People at the cafes taking coffee, tea, wine, and so on. It was a beautiful evening. And then Golden Dawn turned up, black leather on motorbikes, looking for migrants to abuse and beat up. Fascists on the street, going around trying to identify people that they believed to be their enemy or could exploit in the vile thought process that fascists often have. So thank you to them and well done them, and our solidarity is with you always. But remember, the conditions under which Golden Dawn gained so much support was, of course, the terrible process of austerity, of cuts in public expenditure, of privatization, and of high levels of unemployment and poverty in Greece because of the attitude taken by the European Central Bank and others towards that country and the economy of it. The growth of racism and fascism often goes hand in hand with the economics of redistribution of wealth away from the poorest to the richest. And that is exactly what is happening, as Barbara and others have pointed out, and Sabby just now, during the corona crisis. And so the corona crisis has thrown up a lot of things. One is inequality around the world. One is the numbers of people from the Black and minority ethnic communities all around the world who've died as a result of the corona crisis. And it's also shown up the inadequacy of health services in almost every country, but in particular those countries that have almost no health service at all. And we should be supporting the demand of the World Health Organization that everybody on the planet has access to healthcare. We're a very long way from achieving that. There's also been the nastiness and ignorance of anti-Chinese racism as soon as the corona crisis was emerging and was announced, and indeed the specific anti-Chinese rhetoric of President Donald Trump on all of this. This is also Black History Month. And Black History Month is, to me, something that's very, very important. This year, more poignant and more important than ever, because we have a government that is now saying our schools should not be teaching the history of colonialism in an anti-colonial way. Now, just think about that for a moment. I want our children in our schools to learn a lot of things. I want them to learn science, I want them to learn mathematics, I want them to learn philosophy, I want them to learn and understand the difference of faiths around the world and the fundamental unity of most faiths around the world. But I also want them to understand the historical process that has so changed and divided this world. So I think it's quite important that we use Black History Month as a way of promoting that understanding of what colonial history did. The way in which the slave trade was developed as an act of colonialism. The colonial settlers in the Caribbean wanted to grow sugar to make a great deal of money out of it. They didn't have any labor to do it, so they enslaved people from West Africa to do it. Millions and millions of people were forced across the Atlantic into the Caribbean, into the Americas, and died in that process, on the journey, or during the enslavement of their lives there. So the history of the slave trade is inextricably linked up with European expansion and European colonialism. I want our children to understand that. I also want our children to understand that the abolition of the slave trade and eventually the abolition of slavery were, yes, acts of the British Parliament, but they weren't done in isolation. They only happened because the sugar companies were so damaged by the slave uprisings that they couldn't make the money they were making before. So Parliament ended the slave trade and then ended slavery, but also paid massive amounts of compensation to slave owners. And many of us are demanding that reparations be made, and well done Glasgow University for at least recognizing that and being prepared to make those reparations. Understanding of history is very, very important, because a misunderstanding of history gives some people a notion of racial superiority. That racial superiority plays out into racism within our society. And so Black Lives Matters is a crucial movement all around the world. And I stress the word movement because that is what it is. And all around the world, when people saw George Floyd being murdered on the streets of his town, with the police apparently believing they had impunity to do this, many people around the world saw their own lives there. They saw the brutality of their police. they saw the discrimination that they suffered. Indigenous people in different countries around the world saw in that their own lives. And so that global movement is so important, and so important that we fully understand it. But where is our media in all this? Where is our media in reporting the issues facing refugees? There are 70 million people on this planet who are refugees, internally displaced, internationally displaced, but refugees. Refugees are people. Refugees are people who want to contribute and who want to survive and want to make their lives. And so the attitude of the media towards people trying to get to the USA from Central America, the attitude of people trying to cross the Mediterranean to get to Lampedusa, or to get from Turkey into Greece in order to get somewhere safe and secure to live, is quite appalling. And that our Home Secretary, Priti Patel, and others should decide the most important thing now is to use the Navy to stop people crossing the English Channel to go to Kent. Well, there has to be safety and safe ways of seeking asylum, and they could and should be there. But the idea that you use the Navy to keep people out, I just ask you this question. Why would anyone, unless they were utterly desperate, risk their lives and everything to get into a flimsy little rubber boat to try and cross the world's busiest shipping lanes in order to get to a place where they hoped they would gain safety and respect? In 100 years' time, we'll be giving out, we won't be around, but others will be giving out literary prizes for the diaries of refugees of today. People that braved everything in order to provide for themselves and their families in the future. But unfortunately, it's not happening now. What's happening now is abuse and denigration of refugees. And there's no bigger group of refugees in the world at the present time, I believe, than the Rohingya refugees from Myanmar, 1 million of them in Bangladesh, driven out by the army, driven out by a very well-equipped army, driven out by a sense of racial superiority between one group and another, inculcated into the behavior of the army. Utterly disgraceful. So when we fight back against racism, we're fighting back because we believe in humanity, we believe in people, we believe in supporting people around the world. And it's that sense of anti-racism that actually unites all of us. From time immemorial, bankrupt politicians with bankrupt ideas have worked on behalf of the rich and powerful and been prepared to use any argument to divide people, always to divide people. Divide Christians against Muslims, divide Jews against others, divide Hindus against others, always about division. Understanding of each other's faith is important. Understanding each other's national background and national story is very important. But those universal principles of human rights that unite us, those universal principles about respect for each other and humanity, is something that absolutely unites us. And our call today from people all over the world has shown just how united we are, not just to oppose racism, but to try and bring about a world where we do protect our natural world and the environment, where we do provide healthcare for all to defeat the corona crisis, where we do ensure that the equality that we strive for ourselves is there for all around the world. That means challenging the very richest and very most powerful people that have divided us all for so long. And I'm just so delighted to be on this call this evening, and so grateful to all those people on this call for the bravery that they've stood up against racism, against racist attacks, and my sorrow and sadness to those that have seen their loved ones killed by fascists, killed by racists, or indeed killed by police forces attacking those that seek to demonstrate for a better life. Our solidarity is very, very strong, and it's getting bigger and bigger. We're not going to give way to the racists. We're not going to give way to those that try and divide us. Our unity is what will not just save, but enhance and strengthen this planet for all of us to live on. Thank you very much.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Jeremy. So many comments coming through. Liz, who says it's great to see a political leader so committed to fighting against racism. Caroline, who says it's great to see you, Jeremy, and thank you for standing against racism. And lots of supports and solidarity for all of that. And generally, thank you, everyone and all our speakers. I think people have found this such an amazing event. Martin says, thank you, Stand Up to Racism, for a great international solidarity conference. I'm inspired, educated. I am one of many for sure, all the best. Thank you all. It's been absolutely brilliant. I know I've enjoyed every moment of it, but our work doesn't stop here. There are so many more things that we need to be doing and getting organized with. Sabby and Petros mentioned it earlier, but on the 21st of March, 2021, we will see events and actions all across the world for the UN Anti-Racism Day to help us build our actions in Britain. I know there's going to be Facebook links put in, so please do share. This is really, really powerful. And like Jeremy Corbyn says, we have the ability to share all across the networks and all across the world with this. So we really, really do need to build this. Taking it back to this year, November is Islamophobia Awareness Month, and Stand Up to Racism will be holding a series of events on Islamophobia and supporting initiatives led by Muslim groups. And so please do find about that more under the hashtag #IAM20. Also in November, the 1st of November, we'll start Care for Calais' Winter Appeal. Care for Calais is a crucial refugee charity and organisation. And it really does, as Jeremy says, come at the most crucial time for our most vulnerable people in Europe. So please do click the link and find out how you can help. January, we will also hallmark Holocaust Memorial Day, unite against anti-Semitism, fascism, say it loudly and clear, never again. Do contact your local groups for details or events in your community. And finally, to say that our work is really, really important. It's only really possible by the support of you and others. And so please do join, find out a local group and donate to Stand Up to Racism so we can continue this really important work. And this work doesn't stop. Tomorrow, we have the extension of our conference. Same time as today at 5 p.m. You can join Diane Abbott and a host of leading anti-racist activists for our closing rally on YouTube, on Facebook, called COVID-19 Economic Crisis and Why We Say Black Lives Matter. So really, really exciting stuff. I hope to see you all again tomorrow. Hope you invite 1 or 2 more people to join this. I wish you all the best. Thank you again to our speakers and take care. Solidarity to all.